The morning of August 5th, 2025, began with the familiar rhythm of hospital life. Dr. Ludwig Humboldt walked the polished corridors of Lakeland Regional Hospital, his white lab coat crisp and clean, and his black bulletproof vest hidden underneath. The air smelled of antiseptic, and the quiet hum of life-saving machinery filled the background. He had just finished his morning rounds, checking on patients recovering from various surgeries. The day felt routine, predictable even. He smiled at a nurse, shared a quick professional word with a colleague, and made his way toward the emergency department to consult on a new case. The world outside the hospital walls seemed distant, a separate reality from this controlled environment of healing and care. His steps were measured and calm, a reflection of the demeanor he had cultivated over 15 years in medicine. Every day presented its own set of challenges, from complex diagnoses to delicate conversations with worried families. Yet, there was a comforting predictability to it all. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the staff lounge, the warm ceramic a familiar weight in his hands. He thought about his plans for the evening, perhaps a quiet dinner with his wife. The biggest concern on his mind was the declining health of an elderly patient in the intensive care unit, a man he had grown fond of over the past few weeks. It was a heavy thought, but it was a part of the job he had chosen. Underneath his lab coat, a secret layer of protection rested against his chest. It was a thin, black bulletproof vest, a precaution he started taking years ago after a violent incident at a nearby clinic. Most of his colleagues were unaware of it. They never noticed it, since it was so well hidden under his lab coat, as his heart beat steadily underneath it. But for Ludwig, it was a silent piece of insurance in an increasingly unpredictable world. The vest was a constant, subtle pressure against his torso, a reminder that even a place of healing could become a target. He had hoped he would never need it, that it would remain just a strange hidden habit. He entered the bustling emergency room, the controlled chaos of nurses, doctors, and patients a familiar scene. The energy here was always higher, a stark contrast to the calmer wards upstairs. He was about to review the chart for a patient with acute abdominal pain when the first sound cut through the air. It was sharp, loud, and metallic. It was a sound that did not belong. For a split second, people froze, their minds trying to process the unfamiliar noise. Was it a piece of equipment falling? A transformer blowing out? The thought was fleeting, quickly replaced by a dawning, chilling realization of what it truly was. The second shot confirmed everyone's worst fears. It was closer this time, followed by a scream that was raw and terrified. Panic erupted like a contagion, spreading through the emergency room in an instant. The organized chaos dissolved into pure, unadulterated fear. Nurses and patients scrambled for cover, their faces etched with disbelief and terror. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors became erratic, their alarms adding to the cacophony of shouting and crying. Dr. Humboldt felt a surge of adrenaline, his medical training battling with the primal instinct to run and hide. The world had tilted on its axis in a matter of seconds. His first thought was for the people around him. He saw a young nurse frozen in place near the reception desk, her eyes wide with shock. "Get down! Get under the desk!" he yelled, his voice firm despite the tremor running through his hands. He guided a terrified elderly woman who had been waiting for a checkup behind a row of gurneys, urging her to stay quiet. His mind raced, trying to formulate a plan to protect as many people as he could. The shooter was somewhere in the hospital, moving, and every second was critical. The sanitized hallways he had walked just moments before had now become a terrifying maze. He could hear the gunshots getting closer, each one a deafening punctuation mark in the symphony of terror. He ducked behind a heavy supply cart, his heart pounding underneath his vest like a trapped bird. He peeked through a small gap, trying to locate the source of the danger, to understand where the threat was coming from. The shooter was moving systematically, his footsteps echoing with a sinister purpose. Dr. Ludwig knew he was vulnerable, but his duty as a doctor, his oath to protect life, compelled him to stay, to be ready to help anyone who might be injured in the unfolding nightmare. The shooter entered the emergency room. He was a dark figure, his face obscured, moving with a cold and deliberate pace that was more frightening than any frantic rage. Dr. Humboldt watched in horror as the man raised his weapon. The doctor's training had prepared him for medical emergencies, for battling disease and injury with scalpels and medicine. It had not prepared him for this. It had not prepared him for a battle against a man whose only goal was to inflict harm. He pressed himself tighter against the cart, making himself as small as possible, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, methodically, the shooter scanned the room. His eyes, cold and devoid of emotion, passed over the cowering figures and empty gurneys. Dr. Humboldt held his breath, praying he would not be seen. But then the shooter's gaze stopped. It locked directly onto the supply cart where Ludwig was hiding. There was no escape. The space was too open, the hiding spot too flimsy. The man raised his handgun, the barrel pointing directly at the doctor's position. Time seemed to slow down, each heartbeat a loud drum in Ludwig's ears. He was trapped, a sitting duck in the place he once considered a sanctuary of life. Pushing the cart aside with a violent shove, the shooter revealed Dr. Humboldt, crouched and exposed. The doctor looked up, his eyes meeting the shooter's for a brief, terrifying moment. There was no recognition, no flicker of humanity, just a chilling emptiness. Ludwig raised his hands slowly, a universal gesture of surrender, hoping it might be enough. He didn't speak, knowing that any word could be his last. The shooter's face was a mask of cold resolve. He stood just a few feet away, the power of life and death held casually in his hand, aimed directly at the center of the doctor's chest. "Doctor," the man said, his voice flat and detached, as if he were merely stating a fact. The word hung in the air, heavy with menace. Before Ludwig could even process a response, a flash of light erupted from the barrel of the gun. The sound was deafening at this close range, a thunderclap that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. He felt a massive, brutal impact against his chest. It was not a sharp pain, but a concussive force, like being hit with a sledgehammer. The blow threw him backward, knocking the air from his lungs and sending him crashing to the hard linoleum floor. The world went momentarily dark. The force of the impact was immense, a blunt trauma that radiated through his entire torso. He lay on the floor, his vision swimming, the sounds of the room fading into a dull roar. He could feel the shooter standing over him, a menacing shadow against the bright hospital lights. In that moment, he fully expected the final, fatal shot. This was it, he thought, this is how it ends. His mind flashed with images of his wife, his family, a lifetime of memories compressed into one terrifying final second. He braced himself for the end, his body limp on the cold floor. The shooter stared down at the doctor's still form for a long, agonizing moment. Seeing no movement, no sign of life, he seemed satisfied. He turned his back and continued his path of destruction, moving out of the emergency room and deeper into the hospital. Dr. Humboldt lay perfectly still, every muscle in his body screaming to move, to breathe, to run, but he fought the instinct. He forced his breathing to be shallow, almost non-existent. He kept his eyes closed, feigning the stillness of death. He knew the shooter might look back and any sign of life would mean a second, more carefully aimed bullet. Beneath his white coat and shirt, the hidden vest had done its job. The bullet, aimed directly at his heart, had been stopped by the dense layers of Kevlar. A massive purple bruise was already beginning to form over his sternum, and the pain was a deep, throbbing ache. But he was alive. The vest had absorbed the deadly impact, turning a fatal shot into a brutal but survivable blow. The secret he had kept for years, the one his colleagues haven't noticed, had just saved his life. He remained motionless, listening as the sounds of gunfire and shouting grew more distant. Only when the cacophony was replaced by the approaching wail of police sirens did he dare to move. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air burning in his lungs. The pain in his chest was excruciating, but it was the most welcome pain he had ever felt. It was the pain of being alive. He slowly opened his eyes, the fluorescent lights of the ceiling blinding him for a moment. The room was a wreck, a scene of chaos and despair, but he was still here. He had survived. The immediate threat was gone, but the terror lingered in the air like a toxic gas. He placed a trembling hand over his chest, directly over the spot where the bullet had hit. Under his fingers he could feel it, a frantic, powerful thumping rhythm. It was his own heart, beating wildly, a frantic drum of survival against his bruised ribs. It was beating with a ferocity he had never felt before, a powerful testament to the life that had so nearly been extinguished. In the silence of the aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage of his workplace, Dr. Ludwig Humboldt lay on the floor and focused on that one single, beautiful sound, the relentless racing beat of his own surviving heart.